Hello everyone, welcome back to school. Morgan Hibbs here with Linn County Farm Bureau. So this is not how we typically visit your classroom, but I'm excited for the opportunity to visit your classroom virtually. So if you are watching this video, this is a standalone activity, but it also is a part 2 to part 1 that you might have seen already. So if you are watching this in sequence to part 1, then this is the second activity in our soil unit. But this is also a standalone activity, so you might be watching this solely by itself. If you as a class are learning about soil and erosion, this is a great activity to complement that unit. So today we are going to talk about soil and erosion. Erosion is the movement of soil. Now agriculture is so important to us, and you might have learned this in part 1, but if you are watching this as a standalone lesson, agriculture grows our food, fiber, and fuel. It is essential to all of us to be able to enjoy the foods that we eat and the products that we use. Even how you got to school today on the school bus. Your school bus might have been powered by soybeans with biodiesel. So agriculture is so important to us every day. And the basics of agriculture is soil. Without soil, we can't grow crops. We can't grow food. And we also can't raise the animals, the livestock, beef and pork, and chickens and poultry and all of the sheep and things like that. So we wouldn't even have ice cream without soil, because the cows eat the grass and the grass grows in soil. So today we are going to talk about the importance of protecting our soil from erosion. So erosion is the movement of soil, and erosion can appear in pretty cool places like the Grand Canyon. That's a type of erosion that has happened over time because of wind erosion and water erosion moving through the Grand Canyon and forming those rock formations. So we do have some pretty cool erosion around the United States and around the world that are really cool tourist attractions. But we don't want erosion in our fields. Erosion in the fields will take water, and it will take and make a rut or a gully in the field, and that is taking the soil from the field. Now it takes years and years to form soil. So the topsoil, that top layer of soil, is what we grow crops in, and it takes years and years to form that over time through weathering and the breaking down of rocks and sand and silt and clay. And so we want to protect the soil. And being that we have a growing population, we need to be able to feed our growing population with the soil we have available, and we don't want to waste it. So today we are going to look at erosion, and we're going to do a fun science experiment. So today's supplies that you will need, if you are in your classroom, you might have this as an individual activity, or your teacher might be doing it as a demonstration underneath a document camera. So either way, you need a splash zone target, a splash zone graph, and maybe you might be making one of these on the whiteboard if you are doing it as a class. You need a ruler, an eyedropper, some soil. This is just potting soil, but any type of soil will work. A glass of water, some markers to shade in your graph, and then there's a few other things you need. In your kit, you also have an Iowa Ag Today, and if you don't have a kit, then this is available online, linked in the lesson plan. And you have erosion control practice worksheet that talks about how there's different practices farmers can put in place to protect against erosion. And then soils on the move, which is looking at how there's different types of erosion. There's water erosion, wind erosion, and the erosion can look different depending on what kind of erosion it is. Okay, so now let's go ahead and get started on the experiment. Okay, so now we are going to work on our splash zone target. So you have your splash zone here right in front of you, and you can see that there are different rings. There's zone 1, 2, 3, and 4. So we are going to estimate the impact of one raindrop, or multiple raindrops, but how one raindrop can make a huge impact on the soil. And so we have some soil here that you're going to add to the very center of your splash zone. Then you can use your ruler to push it into that center circle as best that you can. Now the ruler is going to help so that we have a control. We want everyone to have the same height of drops so that we can control everyone's experiment and not have too many variables changing the impact of our experiment. So the ruler is just going to be used as a height measurement. Then we have our cup of water and your eyedropper. We are going to drop 5 drops to begin with and see how it splashes. We might end up doing 10 drops if 5 is not enough, and I'll tell you at that point. But we want to see how far the soil travels. So we want to see with 1 raindrop where in the zones the soil lands. So we are going to be tracking the amount of splashes in each zone. So I'm going to hold the ruler, fill my eyedropper, and be careful when you're using your eyedropper. You just want to squeeze once. If you hold the eyedropper, it will squeeze all of the water out. Then you will have a mess on your desk. So you're just using the ruler as a height, and you're going to drop 1 at a time. You want it to be a little, like about 1/2 centimeter away from the ruler, so that way it doesn't travel down the ruler, but instead hits the soil. So we've dropped 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now you can see that the soil splashed around out here in zone 1 and zone 2. But let's go ahead and drop 5 more drops and see what happens. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, so you can see that we had a splash way out here. So now I'm going to put my ruler down. You can move your materials to the side, and we need to see how many splashes we had in each zone. So it looks like we had 1 splash out here out of zone. We had 1 in zone 4. We had 1 in zone 3. Looks like we had quite a few in zone 2. We had 1, and you can just estimate. I know you won't be able to track the perfect amount because some of these particles are very small, but just do your best to estimate how many splashes there were. So we have 1, 2, 3, we'll count this as like 3, 4, and 5. Maybe we'll do 5 in zone 2 because some of those particles didn't get moved from when we tried to put all of the soil in the very center. And you can see in zone 1, we have lots of soil particles out here in zone 1. Some of those were there to begin with, but that is a very significant amount that were not there in the beginning. So it looks like there's more than zone 5. So let's just estimate and say that there is about 10. Okay, so now that we have our zones mapped out and our splashes, we are going to make a graph. So now I have our graph here. And we are going to track how many splashes there were in each zone. So let's start with zone 1, and this is a bar graph, so this is where you can use markers if you have them. You're going to either shade in or mark an X in each box of how many zone or how many drops were in each zone. So in zone 1 we had 10. So I'm going to just mark with an X all the way to 8, and since it only goes to 8, I'm going to stop there, but you can draw an arrow if you would like to signify that there was more than 8. In zone 2, we had 5. In zone 3, we had 1. In zone 4, we had 1, and out of the zone, we had 1. Okay, so this tells me that just a few raindrops can move soil not very far, but even out here to zone 1. But even just those same raindrops can move soil all the way to zone 4 and out of the zone even. So imagine if we had a heavy rain coming sideways, and every time it splashes, look at how it moves the soil. So imagine in the fields what would happen if it was bare soil and we had really heavy rains. It starts to move the soil, and pretty soon it can wash into creeks, it can wash into rivers, and it can make a huge problem for farmers, especially if they're trying to plant crops or harvest crops. Okay, so now let's take a look at our erosion control practices. So we have soils on the move, and I won't go through this sheet right now. Let's take a look at this erosion control practices. So we have different wards down here and pictures that represent the different wards. So the first one is contour planting. Planting crops around the curve of a hill rather than up and down the hill. So that is this one right here. So by planting crops around the side of the hill, the roots kind of create a net, and it's protecting the soil from washing down the hill. Terraces, wide ridges that go around a hill to prevent water from rushing down to the hill too fast. This one right here is 2. And so you can see these are wide ridges of like grass pathways that protect the soil from erosion, being that the hill, it has a very high slope. 3, forest and grass areas. Steep hillsides are kept covered in trees or grass rather than being cleared for cropland. So this is 3 right here. So if some areas might even be better left unplanted and left as a forest or grass area. And this is good for wildlife, it's good for the environment, it's good for the ecosystem, and also we won't have as much erosion because the tree roots are going to protect that soil, and having grass planted there is going to also keep something covering the soil so that it does not erode. Grass waterways, planting grass and not plowing low areas in a field where water usually runs. So that's this area right here. Farmers will notice after a couple years of planting if certain areas of the field are very high erodible areas, and many farmers will put grass waterways in to help protect those certain areas. And there's no use planting those areas because every year they will wash away and they will be very bumpy and have huge ridges and gullies and ruts, and the tractor tires will even get stuck in them sometimes. So it makes more sense for the farmers to put grass in those, so that way there's always something covering the soil, so that way it's not exposed to the rain. Windbreak, rows of trees planted to slow down the wind and to prevent soil from blowing. This is number 5, so this windbreak is trees. So hopefully you enjoyed learning about erosion. Now that you know how erosion can happen and some of the different practices that farmers can put into place to protect against erosion. And then also you learned about the impact of one raindrop and how much soil it can move with just even one raindrop. So imagine if we had lots of rain. And then if you were doing this individually, you would notice that everyone's graph looks different. So that also tells us that rain is unpredictable about where it will hit. So then we have our Iowa Ag Today publication. And I encourage you to go through and read the Iowa Ag Today. But where I really want you to focus is in that middle section. This is Farmers Care About Water and Soil, and you should too. And here are some other additional ways besides the ones from our worksheet that farmers can put into place to help protect against erosion. So thank you everyone for listening. If you have questions, you can ask your teachers and they can help you. And if there are additional questions or questions for farmers, and if you have things you want to know about the different erosion control practices, you can email me and I'd be happy to answer those. So thank you everyone, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.